Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 1. Let's begin with a plot summary. So this is the famous scene where the doctor and the gentlewoman observe Lady Macbeth sleepwalking and sleep talking. The scene starts off with the gentlewoman and the doctor noting her behaviours. The gentlewoman explains that she has seen Lady Macbeth writing a letter. Each night she repeats the same behaviour. She writes a letter and then she seals it. Now this obviously demonstrates Lady Macbeth's need to unburden herself. It's a sign of her guilt or remorse, but it also demonstrates that her behaviour, even though she's asleep and doesn't know she's doing it, is quite reckless in terms of the danger that is being created by writing these ideas down. We also learned that she can no longer cope with the dark. She has to have light by her perpetually, which is obviously a massive contrast from the very beginning of the play in Act 1, Scene 5, where she actually calls upon the darkness to come and take her over and cover her and shroud her so that she's able to take part in murdering Duncan. So again, it demonstrates a real shift in attitude and behaviour. And then the most famous part of the scene is the washing of the hands. Lady Macbeth is imagining blood still on her hands and is desperately trying to wash it off. Now what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to take you through some of the quotations that are uttered by Lady Macbeth, because what we can do is trace back her memories. So figure out when she's speaking, what she's recalling and why. So we'll start off at the beginning. So obviously a very, very famous line here at the very beginning, out damn spot, out I say, 1, 2. So in this moment, we almost imagine her in the present, washing her hands in her dream, seeing blood still there. But as she continues speaking, we realise that she's lost or caught up in a memory, particularly when she says, "Fie, my lord, fie, a soldier and a feared." So you might think back to earlier parts in the play where she's telling Macbeth off and sort of insulting his masculinity. So it could, for example, be her recalling the time where she was trying to convince Macbeth to kill Duncan. But it's possible that it's also slightly later, because she then says, "What need we fear who knows it, when none can call our power to account?" So that leads me to believe that she's remembering a time slightly later on in the timeline when they've already become king and queen, because she's saying, well, no one can question us now, so there's no reason to be frightened. This last utterance, however, yet who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him, is clearly going back to the night of the murder. She said herself that she couldn't do it because he looked too much like her dad. Now she goes, and then she obviously goes and puts the daggers back and so sees him. So you really kind of get this little secret intel into something that happened behind closed doors. She was horrified at how much Duncan was bleeding. So all in all, we're getting those signs of remorse, those signs of real mental trauma and anguish. The next thing she says, "The Thane of Fife had a wife. Where is she now?" So this is really interesting. First of all, note the fact that she's using rhyme. It's almost kind of sing-song, nursery-like, which might tell us something about her state of mind. Perhaps she's sort of needing a more innocent time. But the fact that she uses this question, "Where is she now?" reminds us that she was very much out of the loop when it came to Macbeth's plan here for the Macduff family. So one, it shows her kind of sense of horror, but two, it reminds us that they're absent from each other's lives. It shifts. What will these hands never be clean? Now that's interesting, because that sounds like Macbeth back in Act 2, Scene 2. But again, I think it's this moment in the dream. It's going back to that kind of sense of immediacy. This bit's interesting. "No more of that, my lord, no more of that. You mark with all this starting." So starting in this case, like being fearful. So I think she's remembering back to the to Banquo's ghost in the banquet scene here, because she's saying you're ruining things with all of this jumpiness. So again, note within, you know, just a few sentences, she's skipped around 3 different places in time. Back to her hands. Here's the smell of blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Now, those of you who are quite keen-eyed might be thinking back to Act 2, Scene 2, when Macbeth wondered if all of great Neptune's oceans would be able to clean his hands. So very, very similar ideas, but the sense is different. With Macbeth, he was looking at his hands. Lady Macbeth can smell the blood, and then that's emphasised by the fact that she's saying all of the perfumes of Arabia, so hyperbole. So nothing, it doesn't matter how much perfume she used, she'd still be able to smell it. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that smell is a really emotive sense. When you smell something from your past, it kind of brings the memories flooding back. So in some ways, I think this image is even more powerful than Macbeth's from Act 2, Scene 2. Okay, wash your hands, put on your nightgown, look not so pale. Now that sounds like she's talking to Macbeth just after killing Duncan, because again, wash your hands, but the reference to putting on the nightgown tells us what kind of time of evening it is, and obviously we're reminded of his fear. And then we skip to another part of the play. I tell you yet again, Banquo's buried, he cannot come out on his grave. So we've gone from Act 2, Scene 2, all the way to Act 3, Scene 4, to the banquet with Banquo's ghost. So she continues to just keep jumping around in time. And then the last one, to bed, there's knocking at the gate. So this is obviously her recalling the night of Duncan's murder, because if you remember at the very end of Act 2, Scene 2, you have that really kind of loud knocking that it goes all the way through and then obviously starts Act 2, Scene 3 with the porter. So we have gone all the way back without doubt to Duncan's death. What's done cannot be undone, and that is certainly the case, because here she is, you know, months later, so completely and utterly full of guilt. It is clear from all of these utterances the guilt and remorse she's feeling. It perhaps makes us think that the bravado that she presented at the very beginning of the scene perhaps was actually just that. It was a bit of a show. One of the reasons why she needed to cool down on the spirits in the first place is because she didn't have it in her, and here's the exact example of that. Another thing that you might have noticed about all of these quotations so far is that they're actually written in prose. Now, Lady Macbeth, up until this moment, has always spoken in blank verse, just as all of Shakespeare's noble characters do. So the fact that she's in prose here is quite interesting. Now, the Jacobean audience would have found sleepwalking in itself a very disturbing and unnatural deed. There's something about this whole delivery that suggests that Lady Macbeth's status is being diminished. Shakespeare no longer has her as this powerful figure. Now she's in considerable turmoil, mental turmoil. She's sleepwalking, she's sleep-talking, and therefore it's presented to us in prose. Now, the doctor and the gentlewoman are in a bit of a predicament. The fact that they are watching this happen in front of them puts them in a tricky spot, because what they are witnessing is essentially an admission of treason. But were they to speak of it, they would be committing treason also. So this in itself, this whole scene, is dangerous for all three of them. Now, in terms of the way that they view Lady Macbeth here, they're quite opposing. The doctor seems quite sympathetic, and we'll talk about him in a bit more detail in a moment. The gentlewoman, however, is very, very critical. She actually says that she would not have such a heart in her bosom for the dignity of the whole body. So she looks at what Lady Macbeth is saying and basically thinks, thank goodness I'm not you. Whereas the doctor takes, like I said, a slightly more empathetic tone. And we'll have a look at that now. So it's not just his tone when it comes to Lady Macbeth that we're going to look at. We're also going to consider his general awareness of the situation that they are all in. So he starts off by saying foul whisperings are abroad. This personification reminding us that he knows exactly what's going on in England. He knows that this army is being raised. And he blames this on unnatural deeds. He says unnatural deeds do breed unnatural troubles. So you've got this repetition of the adjective unnatural, which is of course referring to regicide and the disorder of the divine right of kings. And he's saying that this is the reason that we are having such strange occurrences. Now he goes back to Lady Macbeth. Infected minds, so Lady Macbeth and her illness, to their death pillows will discharge their secrets. So he's personifying the pillows there, again saying, you know, if you sleep talk, your pillow's not going to hear or judge you. But the problem here is that she's not just talking to her pillow, she's talking in front of him and the gentlewoman. And he realizes, or he decides, more needs she, the divine, than the physician. So he recognizes that this is not a physical disease or an ailment that can be cured with medicine. He says it's the divine, i.e. religion. So he recognizes that this is an issue of sin and that she needs forgiveness. But if you look at this next line, God forgive us all, you can see here that he thinks that the whole community, the whole world, has become corrupted by this sin and they all need forgiving. And you can see how much he believes it, not just the repetition, but the exclamative as well. And then if you wanted to back up the idea that it's everyone, you just need to look to this inclusive pronoun, God forgive us all. He obviously realises that Lady Macbeth is a danger to herself because he uses this euphemism, remove from her the means of all annoyance. He's obviously frightened that she's going to harm herself, foreshadowing her eventual suicide. And then he explains that, well, his mind, my mind she has mated and amazed my sight. So the whole thing has been shocking to him. And I think this is a really beautiful utterance here. So we've got this lovely alliteration with the nasal M, the mind, mated, amazed, but you've also got assonance looking at both mated and amazed. So we've got this kind of conjunction of the senses, the kind of thought and sight, all demonstrating that everything he sees and everything he thinks is shocking, and the one thing he cannot do is speak. 100%, because he knows that if he was to speak a word of this, he would get accused of treason and likely put to death. So this scene is definitely a powerful one. It's all about the idea of consequence and guilt, Lady Macbeth's in particular, and how it brings her to the points of madness. And on that note, I want to draw back to this idea about the form, the fact that Shakespeare in some way almost demotes her by having her speak in prose, a form associated with villains or low status characters. If you compare this to Lady Macduff's last words, she gets to be eloquent, she gets to be logical, reasonable, rational, everything that Lady Macbeth is not here. I'll leave it to you to think about why Shakespeare might be doing that. Is he punishing Lady Macbeth, or is he revealing that actually that strength that she had at the beginning was perhaps not entirely true? Perhaps some of that was put on. It's an interesting thing, and you can have your own opinion on that. Obviously, the scene is also about the idea of nature and what is natural or unnatural. So Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking would be considered by the Jacobean audience deeply unnatural and a sign of her kind of distress and the kind of wrongness of her behaviours coming back to punish. I've also said tyranny here, and you know, you may agree or disagree, but I think there's something to be said about what's happening outside of the scene. The fact that Lady Macbeth is alone, One of the reasons for that is as Macbeth has gone down this tyrannical path, it has created this void between the two of them, which is how she's ended up in this predicament. So even though it's not sort of obvious on the stage, I do think there's something to be said about the absence of Macbeth here. And the reason he is absent is because of the tyranny of his rule and who he has become. I hope that was interesting and useful for you. Any questions or comments, just pop me a note and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching and happy revising.